بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا، زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم، إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم، وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم، والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. Okay, life is then a unique phenomena, and the concept of mechanism is inadequate for its analysis. We had looked at that. Is factual wholeness, to use an expression of Driesch, Hans Driesch, another notable biologist, life's factual wholeness. I don't know what Driesch meant by that. Factual wholeness. We had looked at Hans Driesch's ideas a bit last time. 1867, 1941. So conceptual, what is he saying? Factual wholeness, I think. Yeah, factual wholeness. So life is then a unique phenomena, and the concept of mechanism is inadequate for its analysis. It's factual wholeness, to use an expression of Driesch, another notable biologist. The kind of unity which, looked at from another point of view, is also a plurality. Factual wholeness. I mean, wholeness is obvious enough as a concept, but I'm just wondering about what is factual wholeness. So let's start with what. So he's a biologist and a philosopher, and his work did focus on the concept of wholeness, but I'm not sure what factual wholeness is. And the German word he used for that is Ganzheit. Yeah, Ganz in German means total or all. Ganzheit. So that's basically a translation. Wholeness is it's in a living organism. So that's yeah. So I'm just trying to see whether factual is just an addition by Allama Iqbal. And his concept of Ganzheit is basically, probably this is not a good one. Ganzheit is basically I argued that what Allama Iqbal is saying, that life cannot be explained solely. So they don't deny that life can be explained partially by mechanical and physical chemical processes, but it cannot be solely explained by mechanical, physical, chemical processes. Okay, so far we don't know what factual here means. By wholeness, he simply meant, among other things, that whole organs is not merely the sum total of its parts, but actually, so that we already saw when we sort of compared mechanical explanation with biological or non-mechanical explanations in a couple of sessions back. Parts of merely the sum total of its part, but actually precedes and govern the development of those parts. So for example, the example we gave was that of a car. The parts of cars are separate from a car. They can be used separately from the car. But other things being equal, part of tree, for example, when it is cut off from tree, then that's not that part which it is. Even we can use the wood, for example, but a living wood as part of plant is something else. That's the main takeaway from it. Otherwise, I think even about a car, we can say that the whole, in a way, is more than sum total of its part, because it's not just part, but their structure and their interconnection which makes the whole. But the point is clear that the relationship between parts and the whole in a car is different from a relationship between part and a whole in, for example, a plant or any living organism. So life is then a unique phenomenon, and the concept of mechanism is inadequate for its analysis. Its factual wholeness, to use an expression of Driesch, another notable biologist, is a kind of unity. So factual wholeness is a kind of which, looked from another point of view, is also a plurality. That's also not clear. So factual wholeness, to use an expression of Driesch, another notable, is a kind of unity. It is a unity which, looked at from another point of view, is also a plurality. How can unity be a plurality? In all the purposive processes of growth and adaptation to its environment, whether this adaptation is secured by the formation of fresh or the modification of old habits, it possesses a career which is unthinkable in the case of a machine. Okay, in all its purposive processes of growth and adaptation to the environment, whether this adaptation is secured by the formation of fresh or the modification of old habits, life maybe possesses a career. That's one of his looks like a favorite word, which is unthinkable in the case of machine. Okay, and the possession of a career means that the sources of its activity cannot be explained except in reference to a remote past, those in which therefore must be sought in a spiritual. Why a spiritual? And what spiritual means there? reality revealable in but not discoverable by any analysis of spatial experience. Because time is involved, I guess. So one thing one thing is that the difference between machine and a living organism is also, in a sense, living organism has a history, and that history defines its being at this point in time. I don't know what that has to do with the spirituality, but that's what he seems to be saying at the moment. It would therefore seem that life is foundational and anterior to the routine of physical and chemical processes, which must be regarded as a kind of fixed behavior formed during a long course of evolution. Fixed behavior. So physical and chemical process must be regarded as a kind of fixed behavior which formed during the long course of evolution. And life itself is foundational and anterior to this routine of physical. Anterior in explanatory sense or in temporal sense? So he seems to be asserting these things as obvious, but they aren't obvious, because life is foundational and anterior mean like life is something which precedes living organism in a way, or at least it precedes physical and chemical processes, and physical and chemical processes are basically byproduct of life. So that in a way gel well with his idealism, because Geist is in a way spiritual. Further, the application of the mechanistic. I'm just trying to read it through first, and maybe we'll come back to these portions again. Further, the application of mechanistic concepts of life necessitating the view that the intellect itself is a product of evolution brings science into conflict with its own objective principle of investigation. So intellect itself, so mind is also not reducible to physical explanation, which is more contentious, although obviously in philosophy and science this is an ongoing debate. It has never been resolved and highly unlikely to be resolved, whether mind is a higher form of physical processes or mind is something sui generis, as Iqbal is saying here. Further, and that's what he means by spiritual. Spiritual for him is life and mind, which is not reducible to physical explanation. That's what his spiritual is for him in this context anyway. Further, the application of the mechanistic concepts of life necessitating the view that the intellect itself is a product of evolution brings science into conflict with its own objective principle, which is what? On this point, I will quote a passage from Wilden Carr, who has given a very pointed expression of this conflict. Which conflict? The conflict between physical explanation and intellectual explanation. Wilden Carr. Okay. We'll go back, and before reading this passage, we'll go back what we have and try to see if we can add anything to what we have already said. So let us say, in all its purposive process of growth and everything, whether that is the formation of fresh or the modification of old habits it possesses, therefore it must be sought in spiritual. It would therefore seem that life is foundational and anterior to the routine of physical and chemical processes, which must be regarded as a kind of fixed behavior formed during a long course of evolution. Furthermore, the application of the mechanistic concepts to life, application concept necessitating the view that the intellect itself is a product of brings science into no. So that's the second one, but I wanted to first look at Driesch, another notable biologist, is a kind of unity. It's a kind of unity. Life is a kind of unity which, looked from another, is also a plurality. So that can mean. So what he can be meaning is when you look at life from mechanistic perspective, it looks a plurality. So you have all plant, for example. It is combination of physical and chemical parts and processes, etc. Okay, so that's one of it. And on the other hand, if you look at life from the perspective of factual wholeness, then life what was the word we use? Life is a unity. You can't understand it as a plurality. So for example, you can't understand why a leaf of a plant has a different relationship, qualitatively different relationship, a leaf with the plant, as compared to, for example, a bolt has with a car, for example. So even though a car is a unity as well, and plurality, and plant is a unity as well as plurality, there are different types of unities and plurality. So that's the makes sense here, if that's what he meant. So in this context, Allama Iqbal is making his larger point that life cannot be explained fully. That's important. So he's not saying that you can't use mechanistic and chemical explanation for understanding plant, for example. A lot of processes in plant you can't understand without those. But that's is a sort of abstraction which we do in order to understand. But full understanding of plant, you have to understand life as a factual whole, and so it cannot be understood on the basis of mechanistic explanation, because you would be talking about life which is a factual whole, which is anterior to its parts, and life as a unity, as one, comes before plurality. Okay, so let's read it again. So life is then a unique phenomena, and the concept of mechanism is inadequate for its analysis. Its factual wholeness, so that's sort of explanation of the first sentence. To use an expression of Driesch, another notable biologist, is a kind of unity. So life's factual wholeness is a kind of unity. which looked from another point of view, that is, mechanism is also a plurality. In all the purposes, now he's trying to generalize that in all the purposive processes of growth and adaptation to its environment, whether this adaptation is secured by the formation of fresh or the modification of old, it possesses a career which is unthinkable in the case of machine. So a lot of things, and the possession of a career means that so it has a history which car doesn't have in a way. A plant has a history which a car doesn't have in a way, even though obviously car has a history as well, but that's a different type of it, because history doesn't define in a way its essence. And the processes of a career mean a possession of a career means that the sources of its activity cannot be explained except in reference to remote past. Sources of its activity, for example, the growth of a plant, cannot be explained in remote past, the origin of which therefore must be sought in a spiritual. That is, spiritual just mean non-physical and non-mechanistic and holistic. So that is, spiritual doesn't have anything to do with what we mean by ruh, which is Amru Rabbi. So spiritual reality revealable in but non-discoverable by an analysis of a special experience. So that is spiritual, that's factual wholeness revealed itself in a special experience, but non-discoverable by special experience, because that's why he also is so much against reducing time to speciality, because time is something which is anterior, which defines spirituality in a way, in his sense. It would therefore seem that life is foundational. Therefore, from all the above, he is drawing sort of conclusion that life is foundational anterior to the routine of physical and chemical processes which are related to special experiences, because life is a temporal activity which has its origins, and that whole journey sort of constituted as well to routine of physical and chemical, which must be regarded as a kind of fixed behavior, so during which a lot. Further, the application of the mechanistic concept to life, necessitating the view that the intellect is in the conflict with this. Okay, now this also needs to be, because it's not clear. If we can decipher this, let's see. Okay, let's try to decipher the logic of Allama Iqbal's claim that his claim here that application of mechanistic concept of life, necessitating view that the intellect itself, intellect or mind, I think it's same, Geist. So if we apply mechanistic concepts to mind, if we can obviously apply, if we think that intellect can be understood fully by using mechanistic explanation, physical chemical explanation, and that intellect itself is the byproduct of evolution, which is explained in terms entirely on the basis of chemical physical processes. For Allama Iqbal, this brings science into conflict with its own objective principle of investigation. So what does he mean by that? That's what we want to decipher. And one way to decide, I don't think it's the final understanding of this logic, but that's what comes to mind. as the first obvious explanation, and then we'll stop it here today. I'll come back to this again, inshallah, next time. But what Allama Iqbal is saying is, so his first claim is that if intellect is the byproduct of chemical physical investigation, or if we use mechanistic concepts only, then we reach a conclusion that is a byproduct of intellect, is a byproduct of physical chemical processes of evolution. Which would lead us to think that intellect or mind is a tool of survival. Obviously, it is a tool, but it's only a tool of survival. And how does it conflict with the scientific principle, objectivity? So, if we think that objectivity is the principle, objectivity of truth is the principle of science, and then if the main tool or main tool or the main tool of scientific investigation is intellect or mind, and intellect and mind itself is the product of survival, then how can it be objective? How can we come at the truth? That seems to be his point. So, because science relies on the objective principle of investigation, so the logic goes, the belief that, or the claim that our minds are actually, so that means that our minds actually discover the objective truth of the world. But if our minds are just evolved machines designed to help us find food and avoid predators, how can we trust them to give us objective, true picture of the universe? That seems to be the conflict. Although obviously the people who believe in evolution or mechanistic explanation, Allama Iqbal is trying to attack, can say that, during this evolution, this mechanistic physical evolution can have qualitative jumps. So quantity can lead to qualitative variations. But this, whether this is a good objection or not, that's to be seen. But we do understand Allama Iqbal's logic here a bit better than we did before when we started reading these. So, and we'll come back to this inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk wa sallim ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammadin wa ala ali sayyidina wa maulana Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim alayhi. Subhanak rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين آمين يا رب العالمين.